Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Marketing Fixed show. This is episode number 9, which is very exciting. We're almost getting to double digits. We've got Sean Dunn in the studio today. You only give stuff to Sean if you want to get it done. Sorry.
I haven't heard that.
This is going to be the episode or the podcast recording for puns, because in my opinion, you are the pun man.
King Pun.
Everybody has got that friend or acquaintance in their network that's just really good at puns. And in my opinion, you're not only good at marketing and obviously, or building sites and creative strategy and all that kind of stuff, but you're also good at puns. So
Thanks. I'll try and throw a few.
from my side, welcome, man. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real honor, and I think the reason we've invited you is not only because I want to, enjoy your company, and we haven't seen each other since lockdown, but it's also because I think you can add a lot of value to, the existing database and customers and listeners that we have.
Cool.
So from our side, we've had a couple of people on board, and we try and usually, talk about marketing specifically, how, the advice that we give, how it can add value to small to medium-sized businesses, business owners, and essentially we've had, I think it was episode number 7, we had someone on board, Ariel Flax, and we talked about how we can connect marketing with sales, because, it's easy to generate the lead, but it's not always, that easy to convert that lead into a customer, or it's easy to get people to your site, but how do you actually convert that person into someone who opens their wallets when it comes to growing your business? So marketing is always one element, and there's always that second thing that you need to focus on, whether it's closing the sale with a sales team, or in this case, we want to talk about a bit of a branding, creative strategy, and then essentially the website itself, that home where you actually host everything together, where you actually explain to people who you are, where you actually give people a taste of the business, the message, why you exist, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's for us very important. We haven't really had someone that can come on board and really kind of like explain and articulate the importance of that, and how do you really go about building a website that can really convert people into customers and leads and really add value. So glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's a very pertinent point, hey. Brands and the philosophies are broadly the same, whether you're if you're an SME. So your website essentially should fulfill a promise. So the risks that any brand or business runs, that you can set the promise creatively and visually in terms of your tone and how you present yourself in the outbound communication, where you do some conquest business and the destination either falls off because you've set an expectation there and that expectation is not met on the website, or vice versa. You've got poor ROI from your paid media channels, for instance, or your email communication and that sort of stuff. And the website is up and running and it's going strong. It does what it needs to do, but there's a disconnect with your inbound channels, your outbound channels, and that sort of stuff. So every brand needs a home, and that's where you fulfill that promise. That's where you fulfill your expectations. That's where you need to do your conversions. And if you can position your brand strongly enough and your personality strongly enough, it's going to influence those conversions.
100%. And I think essentially, I used the analogy before, your website is your home. And I think you just said that. And I think I used the analogy of, I'm Afrikaans, my mom, we're very conservative people. We always want to make sure that when we invite people over, my mom, the day before, even like a couple of hours before people would come over, she's like, you need to make sure that the dogs are fed and that they're outside and that your room is tidy. You never know when someone walks into your room. You never know, keep the bathroom tidy. Don't clean up after yourself. Put away your shoes. And when people do come over, you want to give them a good experience.
Of course. You want a memorable experience. So what you need to really consider is what is memorable. Okay, memorable is positive and it's negative. And you need that consistency across all your experiences, all your interactions and that sort of thing.
100%.
And that's going to influence the relationships that you build. So you build an element of trust, and repetition is trust. Consistency is trust. And quality is trust. What's going to make somebody convert if you put the same products in front of two products in front of a potential customer at the same price point? What's going to be the tipping point? It's your personality.
Yeah.
And that is what's key to that destination. You can have the most beautiful house on the inside and outside, but if the area surrounding it is not optimal, is somebody going to walk through the door, essentially?
I want to break this down, this podcast, I want to break it down into 3 kind of like segments, because essentially there are 3 tiers to the marketing, essentially of really the first tier would be essentially, getting the idea. It's usually the business owner who says, I have an idea. I want to offer this, or we have a promotion, or we have, this is our unique selling point as a business now, whatever it is. So you've got the business owner who comes up, or the team essentially that comes up with this idea, this ideology, like saying, okay, cool, this is what we want to stand for in the market, or this is what we want to do for the next 3, 6, or 12 months, or 3 years, whatever. Then on that, that kind of like breaks down to a second tier where you start, having to do the creative implementation and actual strategy. Like, how are you going to get people to convert? How are you going to get people to understand? How are you going to get people to take note? How are you going to get their attention? And then lastly, you've got the last tier where, like, okay, if someone comes to your site or if someone walks into store and they're actually there on the tipping point of becoming a customer, what else can you do in order to secure that sale? So there's kind of like 3 tiers in my mind. There's probably a lot more, but I think if we have to break it down top level, it's kind of like the strategy that you plan in the boardroom.
Yeah.
Then essentially the creative and the content and the assets that you obviously put together that obviously would run that campaign and fuel that campaign. And then lastly, that converting tipping point where someone is actually in the store on the site. So I would like to start, at top level. Like, you come up with an idea, and I think essentially what happens is you go, okay, cool, this is what we stand for. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is, like, essentially how do most brands, how can they differentiate themselves in the market today in terms of, we every single industry is cutthroat these days. So in your experience, because you do a lot of creative strategy and you sit with brands, and I would maybe pick your brain in terms of, what are some of the things that brands can do today that can help them stand out of this, super noisy environment, essentially, when it comes to crafting an idea or a strategy or a game plan?
Sure. I think for me, critical is putting people first. And when you put people first, any product or service or brand is there to essentially solve a problem. So what is that problem? And that's what needs to be fleshed out. The problem might be you need to shift stock. You've got an overflow of stock. You've got to generate demand. Obviously, that's what marketing is. So what problem are we trying to solve, and what channels are we going to use to solve those problems? If we put the person first, and who is that person? You identify a persona, and you match the persona to the product, and that's when you start wrapping your creative and your tone, your messaging around that persona and that product. You're going to hit your sweet spot. If you also sort of connect the brand to the product and the person, in the middle is where you're going to find your campaign. And then what does that look like? So that campaign and that brand needs to represent, your business as a whole, and you need to humanize that business, and it needs to reflect your target market. If you're going to pursue the line of price point and price point only, you run the risk of, what else am I going to say about what it is that I'm trying to do? I'm trying to communicate. I'm trying to visualize. It's difficult to visualize a price point. If you can visualize the person that you're going after to convert through all those channels, and whatever those channels are, whether it be top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel, that's critical for me on how you're sort of going to do your conquest business.
So what I'm hearing you say is, like, essentially, like, it all comes down to, putting the customer first, and everything else around, will obviously start naturally evolving around that, whatever fits in with your ecosystem. Whether it's a guarantee or whether it's your price or whatever your brand stands for. But it's about putting the customer first and essentially understanding their true pain points and needs, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, pretty much. If you can look at your customer and the customer relationship primarily as the product, the sale can almost be viewed as a sub-product. Who am I going to convert first? The person that I've got a relationship with, or the stronger relationship with, or not? It's the one that I've got the relationship with. So if I can prioritize the relationship and how I communicate that relationship from tone and visuals, it's going to be easier to convert that individual. But that's got to be consistent. That's got to be right the way through the channels. Now we've touched on the website being the destination, being the home. And we've also touched on the potential disconnect between your inbound and outbound channels and the destination. We need to meet those requirements. And that whole journey, subconsciously to the user, is what builds the relationship over time. So, we can get into the nuts and bolts of having a consistent message and tone for your brand, but also using that behavior as qualification. So we know through tracking, through your digital channels, through click-throughs, through interactions with your digital assets, the more hoops you jump through, essentially through behavior, the more that individual is essentially qualifying themselves. So traditionally, if we look at a website, in the website context, a lot of brands focus a lot of attention on the form fill-in. Now, me as an individual, as an example, see that form fill-in as a hell of a commitment. Do you know what I mean? If you're asking me from an automotive perspective to book a test drive, you're essentially telling me, listen, you need to come through to my dealership and put my bum in the seat. I'm not really ready yet, okay? But I've visited your website 10 times. My behavior essentially is qualifying that. The trick is to match your message as a brand, as a retailer, to the user's behavior, and nurturing that essentially through automated content, through remarketing. So if it's a known contact and they're sitting within your CRM and you've got the right CRM in place, we know who you are, we can communicate to you because it's permission-based. You've got an existing relationship. We know it's cheaper to keep a customer than it is to get a new one.
Yeah, about 10 times, eh?
Yeah, it's massive. So you need to be able to leverage that. But that's a relationship. And that relationship, an element of that relationship is your personality. And your personality is essentially your creative positioning and your message and your tone. And how I speak to you as an individual and not as a conquest. A lot of entities and a lot of brands and a lot of products, you're talking R500,000, R750,000 cars, for instance, are being pitched in the same way as that you pitch a packet of washing powder. You know, get this car for this much. You know, you're asking for a bit of a commitment. If you want me to spend, R750,000 on a car, it needs to be seen in its own context. So the higher the positioning of the product, the more work you have to do. If we've got a lot of experience in the automotive industry. Yeah. And that sales cycle, I think the average now is 42 months.
Sure, that's long.
It's long.
Where, just out of interest, where did that start? Like essentially in when the economy was a little bit better, like obviously that...
It's going to be worse now.
Yeah, so my question is like, it's now 42 months?
42 months.
What was it like 5 or 6 or 10 years ago? Do you have any stats on that or not really?
Not on hand.
Okay, so we don't know how...
the average now is now the 42 months. So the context that we're getting to is that you need to maintain that dialogue. You need to maintain that relationship for 42 months with me, who I've already bought for, because we know that by 10 times it's cheaper to convert me than a new customer. How are you going to maintain that conversation? If you keep banging the price drum as a brand, that's my message, that's how I've positioned myself as an entity, I'm not going to listen to you much over the course of 4 years. But if you put me first and what my needs as an individual are, I've got a young family, I need space, affordability, especially now.
Economic in terms of fuel.
All that sort of stuff. It's about a life cycle. So it's a product life cycle and it's an individual's life cycle. How you speak to that visually and through your messaging is what's going to keep you on the line for longer. An analogy I use with clients often is, if I'm going to go to a bar and sit around a table, who am I going to listen to the most? The funniest guy or the guy that bangs on about the price he paid for his meat? Over and over and over. I'm not going to invite you much, or I'm not going to come to your bar much anymore.
Your ears are going to fall off.
Exactly. So that's the trick for brands. And any retailer. You can be a greengrocer down the road, or you can be a massive OEM. You need to be able to keep these guys on the line for longer.
You know what I find the problem is, and please correct me if you either agree or don't agree, but I think not only has social media to some extent, made it easier for people to advertise. So the barrier to entry is very low. Anybody with $100 can advertise. So there's so much more noise. Yeah. So we're seeing more ads every single day. We're becoming immune to it. That's one problem. But also on a bigger scale, more brands are offering more products, and essentially they are now starting to, they've in the last 20 years already, they've been starting to tap into each other's markets because everybody wants to grow. So you'll find that Game stocks everything now. Woolies stocks everything now. You walk into a Checkers or a Pick and Pay or whatever, and you can get anything you want. Where 10, 20 years ago, Woolies was specialized in something and Game was specialized in something. There was a trade center. Okay, trade center would be a different, LSM altogether, or you're depending on the goal of the visitor. But I think essentially every single car, even car manufacturers, like everybody's doing a Bucky and everybody's doing a sedan and so not only is your barrier to advertising lower, but you're also starting just to compete with each other because everybody is starting to work on the same products and services because everybody wants to grow. Yeah. Do you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, 100%. So your context is social media. If I am the greengrocer that I referenced earlier, my competition in the social space is not the greengrocer down the road or the Woolies down the road. My competition is Nike. My competition is U2. My competition is BMW. It's because everything lives in space, in that space. I mean,
Correct.
I read a stat, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at one point, there were 1,500 posts fighting for a position on your feed every time you logged on. That's a hell of a lot of noise. So
Yeah.
how do you surface that? And we know Facebook and the algorithms and all that sort of stuff and the AI behind it are in constant flux as to what gets determined, what gets surfaced. Okay, and the more I'm going to engage with your brand, the more their content is going to surface. The trick is the content. The trick is how you position yourself and where you position yourself and what you position yourself with. So where we speak to round it back into the website and that sort of stuff, there needs to be that consistency between the home, which is essentially where we want to get the individual from a conversion perspective. So hypothetically, if I'm a greengrocer and I've got my website, that's where I'm going to do my conversions, or that's where I'm going to do my remarketing if I don't convert, and what those channels look like. But you're right, there's a lot of noise out there. So you need to identify your niche and what it is that you're good at as an individual or as a brand or as a retailer or as a business, and put yourself at the top of that. And stick to what you're good at. The more you diversify and the more you sort of start spreading yourself thin, the more you're going to start diluting your message.
And I also see the problem with brands in terms of, we're living in the economy is tough. Like we're living in difficult times. So I suppose in terms of marketing budgets, it's the first thing brands cut, right? Like it's the first thing that they want to, because it's a luxury to some extent, or that's the perception of and it's not fixed, so you can manipulate it to some extent. So you have less money now than you had, 5 or 10 years ago. And on top of that, you've got more things to articulate.
Yeah.
So you're spreading yourself thin in terms of budget. And now you have a creative team who comes on board. Like we've said now, the CEO or the marketing team has come up with this great idea. They've now put the user, let's for argument's sake say they put the user in the middle. They understand the pain points. And now there's 3 or 4 different messages essentially that they want to articulate. And I think that's where creative agencies come in, and you need to truly understand the business model.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You need to understand the business, what they're trying to achieve, because it's up to you to say, guys, your budget does not allow us to articulate 3 or 4 or 5 different messages. We believe here's what we need to articulate and here's how, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we try to do is we take a step back as an agency and we look at your business as a whole. We can execute on a campaign if that is what you want, but we sort of say, what is the business trying to achieve overall? And start connecting the dots that way. If you want to go in that sort of direction, is the business equipped for it? So this again speaks to how you position your brand and how you position a campaign. You can set an expectation creatively and visually. You can reach a destination, sort of destination point, and you want your business and your brand to convert in that moment. But is the channel in which you're trying to convert the right one for the business? Can you fulfill the promise or that you're sort of setting in the customer journey that you've set up, sort of internally? So again, from an automotive perspective, you want somebody to inquire on a certain special offer. You've submitted your details now. The details have reached the salesman, and the salesman sort of drops the ball. Okay, it takes a while to respond, and what they respond with doesn't sort of egg me on. Do you know what I mean? You're not putting me as an individual first. You're not putting my needs first. Those needs will speak to the hoops that I've jumped through. If you're tracking effectively on your website and through the channels that you're doing from a CRM perspective, you'll know that I've clicked on these 3 emails, I've visited the website 5 times, I haven't necessarily converted, or I have converted, I've done the heavy lifting, and I've put a strong campaign in place, and the ball falls off on the floor. You need to align your channels consistently across the board, if that's also sort of answering your question.
No, for sure.
So all the elements within your business need to align. You need to be able to connect those dots all over the place. And what problem am I trying to solve? There are several problems across all of your channels. Okay, if you can solve those effectively enough and minimize the noise and the hoops that I have to jump through to get to my website, once I'm at my website, there's as little friction as possible between the need, i.e. what I'm looking for, and the conversion, you're going to get better results. So yeah, that's where we position ourselves. Don't look too much at things in isolation.
Yeah.
Have a look at broadly at the campaign, and is the business equipped to fulfill on that campaign?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think we've had a discussion earlier where, because we strongly bottom line focused as an agency. I mean, we're 2.5 years old, and that's where when I started the business, that's where we want to focus on. We enjoy performance marketing. I was actually in a meeting yesterday where I said, I don't know why we chose performance marketing because it's damn stressful. But nonetheless, it's something that we enjoy. And I think what happens is a lot of times people come to us in terms of, they want to market their business. They're ready to take things to the next level. And they're just not equipped. The assets doesn't allow us to really, to run PPC or any social media marketing campaigns. So, meaning they don't, this website is like completely, just looks like a 9095 Windows or MS-DOS kind of site. And essentially, that's where we then have that hurdle. There's massive friction because we can spend money on your marketing and we can really get the brand out there, but we're not going to get people to convert just purely because there's so much friction. You're not making it easy for people. And I think that's kind of like the customer experience, essentially. Like that's, you've like you've mentioned now, all the different channels needs to be consistent. And every single channel has to have some form of experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But an interesting question would be like from a creative strategy and from maybe from your perspective in terms of advice that you've given in the past, is that every single channel is different. Like how do you keep it consistent and how do you really go about making sure that there's one single element that people actually take home?
It's tricky, eh? I mean, with the growth of digital, it's opened up so many more components to try and hook an individual. Okay, so where we speak to behavior-based qualification on the website, what is that behavior and who's performing that behavior? It's difficult at the top of the funnel because you're just trying to fill that bucket. Hopefully the bucket doesn't have any leaks in it. You don't want that leaky bucket effect. When you speak to conversion, it depends on what the people engage with. So if you do paid social, for instance, and you set up a campaign and there are 4 ads within that campaign that speak to the different types of personas, you'll know what works and what doesn't. Okay, and especially in the game that you're playing in sort of middle to bottom of funnel from a conversion perspective, there's data around. So there are learnings. It's difficult for brands and small business to understand what it is what is data, what is it sort of telling you. But play around with the messaging and the positioning and that sort of stuff. Don't be scared to take risks. If you're going on a cost per click model, look at that channel and that click as learnings, not necessarily always as conversions. And find your sweet spot. You're going to know what people are engaging with or not. For smaller businesses, it's difficult to generate that type of content and find it. Have a chat to your customers. See what they engage with. You get, also being in that digital space, you have tools with which to use that are cost effective. Try and get those opt-ins with a customer's one-on-one sort of thing. So say it's email, for instance. In the back of my mind, that's what I'm sort of thinking of. Send out value-added content and look at your business as a service and not necessarily as a product all the time. I keep wanting to sell this bottle of water, but what value can I wrap around that bottle of water to keep the conversation going? And as the conversation keeps going, you wrap it around a consistent visual and visual tone, and that's how you're going to sort of learn what engages and what doesn't. You don't have to feel intimidated. From a social perspective, can feel intimidating. There's just so much noise around at the moment. There's so much noise on a political level, an economic level, a health level with COVID and all that sort of stuff. So it's difficult to surface yourself as a brand, as a campaign, as a product, as a sale. But you'll find your niche spot. Play around. Don't feel intimidated to sort of think, listen, I don't have the resources or I don't have the skill set or the knowledge set to reference from a visual perspective. Put something out there. The message and putting the person first, so putting your, let's call it a conquest, first as an individual is what's going to resonate. That's it essentially.
No, thanks. And I think you've explained it quite clearly, but what I'm hearing you say is don't be scared to test and see what people resonate with.
Try. Yeah, absolutely. Build that bond and build that relationship. Even if even if you drop the ball somewhere from a customer service perspective, okay, people will forgive that if they've got a consistent relationship with you as a brand and they know what they're going to get. People forgive that sort of stuff. If you make mistakes in terms of your branding or service or experience on your website, whatever the case might be, because the relationship is intact and you're treating the individual as a person and you're putting that relationship first, remember we alluded to it earlier, if you can look at your relationship as the product and the sale as the byproduct, people will be okay with it. They'll open up to it.
And I think let's touch on that for a second, just purely because I think, when you said it, like, when bells and like the little light bulb goes on and you're like, hey, I've never actually thought about that before. You've mentioned specifically that the experience should be seen as a product of the business.
Absolutely. That's how if you get into a car, okay, and you've just bought a BM, for instance, there's an expectation there, and you've wrapped yourself in this experience to such a point where you go, I'm not going to go back anymore. It's the same with the touch point offline. I mean, that's where we talk about consistency of the brand. I'm in the process of getting a bike, okay? Walk into the dealer, have a chat to the guy. He's converted me purely through the engagement that I've had with him. And it was such a cool chat with the dude. I spent double what I wanted to.
Yeah, of course.
Let's be honest. But he's the salesman, or the owner of the business. I spoke to the owner of the business, not a salesman. He was so engaging in putting me first that it's a no-brainer. Actually, you've got me, you've hooked me. Because he put me first as a person, and my needs first as a person. I explained my situation. Given the current context of where we are as a society over the last 3 or 4 months, people working at home more and more and more, I'm downscaling a little bit. And he put that first. And he said, listen, I've got this for you. This is the price point. I was like, that's quadruple what I wanted to spend. Yeah. I've got this for you, which will meet whatever needs you are. It's still double what I wanted to do. But the experience was so sort of engaging. The brand is powerful. And he reinforced that. And he put himself back. He said, listen, you first. I'm actually not going to make much on that. But let's do what you want. Adds me to their WhatsApp group. And it's just such a powerful, strong community. These guys are such enthusiasts around that brand.
Oh, wow.
I'm done. And I haven't even got the thing yet.
You know what I'm hearing you say? Empathy.
So, absolutely. We try to take the approach, EAT. If brands and businesses and retailers can keep this in mind, EAT. Empathy, authenticity, and transparency. If you can have a look at that and keep that in the forefront of your mind, where you look at putting the person first and the experience first as a product, use EAT, you're on the right track. So let's look at empathy. Empathy, from a website perspective and a digital strategy perspective, means putting the user's needs first. So we know as a business we've got a need, we've got a certain product that fulfills that need. Don't keep selling the product to fulfill the need. Sell the solution that you're trying to position the product towards.
I like that. Okay.
Empathy, authenticity, don't try to be something you're not. It's and where we say being something that you're not, again, you're setting the expectation through certain channels. Where you drop the ball and where the expectation is not fulfilled is not authentic. Okay, because you can't fulfill the promise that you've set up, and that speaks to authenticity. I've made the promise, and now I understand your problem. Okay, I'm going to solve your problem. I've now set you on a journey to solve that problem through the digital channels and the spacing, positioning, from a creative and visual context. I've dropped the ball now because I'm treating it as a conquest. So say I put my product, now I start pushing price. I'm not authentic. I'm still not solving your need. I'm solving my need. I need to sell this bottle of water at the end of the day. It's not the fact that you're thirsty. I'm not thirsty, dude.
Yeah, I don't want your bottle of water. Buy this water, yeah.
Keep me thirsty. And solve the need of quenching my thirst, and not the fact that I need to sell this bottle of water. And then transparency. Where we said earlier, people will forgive businesses dropping the ball if they're transparent about it. I don't know if you saw yesterday. There's a business in New Zealand called Rocket Lab. Similar ball spaces, similar space as SpaceX.
Oh, okay. Cool.
They sent 5 satellites they were launched 5 satellites into orbit.
Recently?
Yeah, I think over the weekend.
Oh,
and
cool.
It exploded. 5 satellites, thanks for coming. $5 million worth of equipment. The first thing that the owner of Rocket Labs did, and they're a small business based out of New Zealand, on the front foot, we cocked up.
Yeah.
There's 5 million pieces of 5 satellites floating around the sky, and we messed up, and we're going to fix it. You're willing to forgive that if you're open and transparent. You now create a sense of empathy towards the business owner because they're transparent and they're authentic. And you go, okay, let's start again. Let's give it another go.
Yeah, a lot of times brands are defensive.
Absolutely.
And they pretend like it wasn't actually their fault, and they kind of try and get the public to understand that, hey, we're not actually in the wrong. This is just something that happened. But purely, like you're saying, being transparent kind of like builds trust.
Acknowledge.
You have to you're taking a step back in terms of sales, but you're taking 2 steps forward in terms of trust, which will pay down dividends down the line.
if I've got an issue with my car and you push back at me and sort of say, well, this isn't our problem, I'm not going to come back to you again. Same thing with a consistent user journey, a customer experience across your digital channels, online and offline. If we've made a mistake, acknowledge it, treat it, and build trust that way, as opposed to being defensive. Rather take the knock financially, say it's a car and there's an issue. You're going to get me back as a customer again. People need to, and brands and businesses need to see the longer term picture in terms of building that relationship and that dialogue. Dialogue's very broad, to get me back in again. So when you look at, and again, I reference our experience in automotive, how do we keep that dialogue going for 42 months? Wrap service around the vehicle itself. And service can be experiential. Open me up to experience on your brand, events, value adds, and you're going to convert me so much better 4 years down the line. Instead of looking in the now and going, how are we going to sell this month's targets? This month's targets could have been built 3 years ago if you'd done it right then. Look bigger, look broader, and that's what we say. We take a step back and we say, what is a business trying to achieve? Not necessarily the campaign or the creative in isolation.
Yeah, man, and I think thank you for everything that you've shared already. Like, I think it's helped quite a lot. So, in to put things in perspective, we've got the kind of like the idea now that the marketing team has come up with, and the CEO said like, hey, cool, let's do this. We now know, build it around the customer, make him the primary focus, him or her, essentially all their needs, the pain points, and essentially find a message that you can be consistent with across all the different channels. And, from there, by being consistent, by being clear, you essentially building trust and you're creating a sort of experience. And this is kind of like why my favorite part of the podcast now is where we're going to start talking about the actual website, the experience of the website, and essentially what you do. So, I mean, you've built probably close to 1,000 websites in your life, probably. So I think in essence, if you were a small to medium sized business that now, if you feel you've got most of the stuff covered, the only 2 steps left is really building, a website, and then essentially, let's say you've got your sales processes in place even. The next step is to get a site and then essentially amplify, awareness with social media or digital marketing campaigns.
Sure.
What would the first thing be that you look at building a website? So if a customer had to come to you and say, cool, I want to build a site, you take a step back and what do you do from there then? Where do you start?
We take a step back and it says, what is your funnel? Okay, so what is the entry point? What is it that we're trying to position? And how are we trying to close? So if we look at a lead conversion model.
How would you dumb that down for me, speaking to me like I'm 5?
Okay, cool. We want to sort of say, what is the need? Okay, the need is, I'm thirsty.
Of the customer, obviously.
Of the customer. What is the need of the customer? But look, what is the need of the business as well? Okay, so where where these 2 or 3 entities merge is where your soft spot is. So the customer or the visitor's got a need. We've got a solution. That sweet spot is what we need to position. So I'm thirsty. I position the product in a way that solves the need. That then obviously drill down. We don't go further than the 3 steps. So the 3 steps is as an introduction, a click through, and a conversion. So a conversion is somebody that now has either bought the bottle of water or has inquired about the bottle of water or has told us that they are a young family and they want 4 bottles of water. Okay, so now we start developing personas. And this is the sort of stuff that we capture in the back end from a CRM perspective. And if you want to nurture from the website, we build collateral, either from a remarketing perspective or an email perspective if it's already a customer. And we start speaking to their pain point of 4 bottles of water for 2 young kids under the age of 10 sort of stuff. But you want as little friction as possible.
Correct.
To get to the end result. So from the game that you paid in from a paid media perspective that your paid media, and especially from a Google perspective, picks up that friction and says this isn't a great user experience once I'm at the destination, and there are certain impacts on your paid media strategies. You need to keep that sort of stuff in mind in terms of, again, your friction and what it is that I am as a brand and how am I presenting myself to the end user to start building that online relationship and that online connection that somebody relates to, that has an empathy with, that is authentic and that is transparent. From the nuts and bolts perspective, from a user experience side of things, now for those that don't know what user experience is, it's basically the way you physically structure your page and the content within your page to best convert. So conversions again are broad. Hey, a conversion could be a broad, like a page visit. A conversion might be a click on something. A conversion might be a form fill-in or an inquiry. And you need to structure the architecture, the framework of the website optimally to best lead to that conversion. So you sit down with the brand or the business, or you as an individual, if you're not in the position to hire agencies or designers, and say, keep it very simple. How best am I going to reach my goal? And my goal is I want somebody to inquire about this bottle of water. And that's how you're going to build your funnel. So the more clicks you put in place is more friction. If you think of a click as a door, the more doors that I have to walk through, or the more keys that I have to put in to unlock that door, the less optimal the experience.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I want to touch on. I want to ask you a question. I want to ask a question on one of them. But the other thing is, we believe that it needs to take you 1 or 2 clicks. 1 click would be optimal, but no more than 2 clicks to get to exactly where you want to be, essentially, which is the final offer of what you're actually there to find on the site. So if you had to come, for example, to, you quite strong in the automotive industry. So if you had to come to, an automotive website, it shouldn't really take you more than 2 clicks to get to the final offer or the final, kind of like conversion page where you actually positioning whatever you're trying to sell. Is that something you believe in, or what is your perspective on that?
I do. So again, from an automotive perspective, and if you think of real estate as well, that's a massive amount of investment. So from our experience, you want as little friction as possible, but you want the best experience as possible. So you're not going to get me to convert on a 750,000 rand car if it's going to be a 1-pager with a simple form fill-in that says buy now, inquire now. That's not enough. You're asking, a house and your home and your car are the biggest investments that you can make. You can invest yourself in terms of debt and all that sort of stuff.
Of
It's a hell of a commitment. And expecting me to convert with as little info as possible, sort of thing, you haven't created the experience, enough of an experience to convince me to submit my details, to commit to the journey of the purchase. So I agree with you. You want as little clicks as possible, but you want the best experience.
You need to find that balance.
That sweet spot. Yeah, you're not going to convert. Let's take a step back. Businesses that portray their product in an environment that doesn't fulfill the experience are putting themselves first broadly. Okay, I want the sale. Here's the offer. Make sure it converts. Well, speak to convert. What is a conversion? So time on site can be used in a conversion. So for those who don't understand, time on site is I can spend 10 seconds on a site, which counts as a bounce, or I could spend 10 minutes on the site, and that sort of tells me as a business, this person's really interested. How do we speak to this best? And that's where, in your game, remarketing comes in. So remarketing is I served an ad based on a web page visit, which is tracked through a pixel, and then we carry on that conversation through other channels. People and listeners might identify with banner or display advertising that sort of follows them around the web and websites that they visit. There's a consistency in these ads and that sort of thing from the same brand and the destination that I've come from. That needs to be that message and that visual needs to be consistent to my visit, and that speaks to the broader customer experience.
Yeah.
And the starting point is that website experience. So be open, play around. There's things called, and this is a big word, conversion rate optimization.
Yes.
So
I love that.
In our game, it's you might have put a framework of a page in place which you think works, okay, but the data is going to tell us whether it's working or not.
Correct.
If it's not working, based on certain KPIs that we put in place, how do we reorganize the layout of the page that meets the customer's expectations and ours from a conversion perspective? Are you going to have your form at the top of the page of the business, or are you going to have your form at the bottom of the page? By putting your form at the top of the page, in my mind, speaks to what it is that we're trying to advertise. A form at the top of the page for a bottle of water is one thing. Form at the top of a page where you're asking me to spend R1 million on a car is a different thing.
Correct.
Because you're basically just saying, fill in your details now, as opposed to an experience that's going to lead me to the conversion.
And almost qualify the lead. It's
through behavior.
It's like qualifying the lead. before they actually enter the system.
Yeah, exactly. So to answer your question, we're going into a bit of detail in terms of the structure of your site. The less friction, the better, but fulfill the experience, fulfill the expectation that you've set in the user getting there. Ideally, if you're coming from a paid media perspective, social media, paid advertising, social media, Google search. Google search are the ads that display on the top and the bottom of the page.
Correct.
Also set the tone. Speak to the individual that gets them to hook, but fulfill that experience on the website as well. Create as little friction to the end product or the end conversion, and fulfill the promise of a positive user experience.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for answering that. And then
Sure.
the other thing I wanted to ask was, I have a saying, just purely because, I'm strictly lead gen and conversion focused. I have a saying, one message per page. It's almost like, I know it's not always possible, but and what I mean by that, it can be taken out of context, obviously. But a lot of times we have SMEs that come to us and say, okay, my website's ready, I want to start marketing it. And then I'd find that it's one page with a lot of different things, who we are, where can you find us, what we do, the owners of the business. And then a lot of times I'm like, look, that's great that you want to articulate that. That's awesome. But put it in a destination, put it in a specific spot somewhere on the site where people can go and find it if they're interested. Don't put it in front of them if you don't know if that's what they want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I usually say is one message per page. And the best example I can reference here is that we've got a security company, ATG Digital, and they do access solutions.
Okay.
They digitize the access points for companies. And what they do is, even though it's a simple offer, that's similar to everybody. It's digitizing your entry, the access point essentially. To some extent, the general manager of a golf club versus the general manager of a shopping center versus the general manager of an automotive, the retailer itself, everybody wants a solution best suited to their needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So essentially, even though the product is quite versatile and can be used in any industry, people want to know, how does it fit into my business and my industry? So what we say is like, okay, cool. What we've done for them is that, okay, build a landing page specifically for schools, build a landing page specifically for golf clubs, build a landing page specifically for shopping centers. So what's happened is that the guy who runs a shopping center, or the health of safety, or, the key decision maker in the health of safety or security or whatever, the general manager would go and be like, hey, this is for me because it's contextual to my needs, versus just looking at a digitized access point and then wondering, is this suited to me? Now I need to inquire and actually find out from your sales team if we can use this.
Yeah.
Versus just telling me right there and then, this is perfect for me.
Yeah, exactly. One size does not fit all. And you can't paint every prospect with the same brush.
Yeah.
So to use that sort of context from a website perspective, businesses need to ask the question up front first and tailor the destination according to that need. So, sort of the game that we play in, we can generate what are called dynamic landing pages. So a landing page is essentially a web page, but when they become dynamic, the content on that website changes specific to the first click. So I want to buy a car, okay? The 3 questions you can ask are you a speed demon? Are you a family man? Or happily retired? Because those are 3 different, let's call them contact points. Okay, the different personas.
And all 3 are going to buy a different vehicle. Yeah,
they're going to buy a different vehicle, but don't put the vehicle in front of them. Ask them what the need is first. Okay. When it comes to dynamic landing pages, what's really awesome about those is that you don't have to build 3 different pages dependent on the click. You build one page and it populates the content that you've pre-populated, which is sort of loaded in based on what you clicked on. Okay, so it almost expedites the rollout. And then you start building these landing page funnels. There's some very interesting software that's coming out now.
That's what I wanted to ask you. I know there's a software tool called Unless that does something similar, but is there something specific that you guys are using out of interest? If it's intellectual property, you don't have to tell me.
No, not at all. So, that's the benefit to SMEs, is that there's loads of software out there. Active Campaign are a good one. SharpSpring, HubSpot are out there. HubSpot is probably a higher price point.
Yeah.
Sort of top of tier.
Specifically
corporates.
for dynamic landing pages now.
Yeah, you can generate these landing pages across multiple platforms now.
Okay.
But what's awesome about these platforms is that they tie in with the lead nurturing. So what is lead nurturing? If I still want to buy this bottle of water and I'm not really convinced yet, you maintain the dialogue and the conversation through email based on my web page visit. So because I'm an existing customer and I've bought water from you before and I'm questioning, should I buy water from you now again or should I go somewhere else? Because you've got my details and you've driven me to a specific page and I'm a family of 4, so I want 4 bottles of water, you can speak to my need dynamically across the web if I haven't converted. But you speak to me as a family man, speaking to my needs as 4 individuals within a home that might need something specific to where I am in my life stage. Same goes for vehicles. You're not going to speak to me about 2-door sports cars. You're going to speak to me about 4-door SUVs because that's my specific need. Getting back to dynamic landing pages and all that sort of stuff is that you can tailor the messaging and the positioning of your campaign specific to my pain point, and you can answer my need with dynamic content. So it sounds complicated because that's a game we play and it's sort of second nature, the language that we speak. It's not as complicated as people might think if you've got the right partner to roll it out for you, and a partner that sees the business and the need and the campaign from an umbrella perspective, and then that starts connecting the dots across the web to lead to better conversion for me to either purchase this vehicle or purchase a bottle of water, whatever the case might be.
Well, yeah, awesome, man. And I think, I know you've got somewhere to be, so I thank you for your time.
No,
and I want to ask one more question, and then, 2 more. And the first thing is that, I think a lot of people underestimate this, and a lot of business owners and maybe even, people in marketing positions are not always aware of this, but the part of the experience on the site is also how your site loads.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people have this beautifully designed site. The creatives are all high res. It's really, really good looking. You can actually see the reflection, and on all the creatives and, the photos that are taken, and it's really amazing. But essentially what that's done is it's pushed up the loading time of the site, which I know is a big pain point for users because people are impatient. We live in a world of obviously where convenience is put first. So my question is, how would one try and find the balance between, a site that loads fast and obviously something that's well designed, where you offer that great experience? And, is there some recommendations that you can, give some of the SMEs out there in terms of, I know there's Google website speed tests that you can do. Maybe elaborate on some of the stuff that people can do and how do people find the balance between that?
Sure. So again, I think it alludes to behavior-based qualification, what people are prepared to commit to in that moment of visiting that website. So take a step back. If a page takes long to load, I think the average in the US now is sort of 3 seconds. If a page doesn't load within 3 seconds, it bounce.
So the stats show that for every second the page loads after 3 seconds, I think there's a 30% chance of someone dropping off. So every second after 3 seconds, there's a 30 to 40% chance that someone will just drop off and leave. So Amazon did a test and they found that for every second after 3 seconds, they lose like $100,000 in sales or something like that.
That's crazy.
Obviously, they're massive, so it sounds like it sounds unrealistic when you think of the figure.
Yeah.
But if you take into context how big the business is and how much traffic they get, then it starts making sense. $100,000, if not more now, because I think this was like 2 years ago. For every second after 3 seconds, they lose.
Yeah.
So obviously, speed is an element that needs to be taken into consideration.
If you look at how much money Jeff Bezos is making, the pages are loading quickly.
Yeah.
So I think if somebody lands on a page, surface the initial message and visual as quickly as you can. If a user is that vested that they want to find out more, and finding out more requires additional information. So information is visuals, it's video, it's content and all that sort of stuff. They'll commit to doing it. So it's a balance. You also can't. It's difficult to provide a positive user experience, something that's engaging and something that converts, if it's really superficial. Now, when we say superficial, is if we have to align so strictly to the speed of a loading page, of loading a page up, and not have an experience. Let's take a step back.
Well, I want to add on that because before you continue, sorry to interrupt you, but this is the one thing that you're touching on that makes complete sense because, AMPed, which is Google's AMP.
Yeah. What's it? Accelerated mobile pages.
Yeah, I was about to say Amplify, but it's accelerated mobile pages. So 3 or 4 years ago, every single business wanted an AMP page because it allows for higher rankings because Google favors obviously sites that load faster.
Yeah.
But what they found was, and there's studies that are coming out now, and from some thought leaders in the space, is that a lot of people are moving back to traditional website pages. So they're leaving AMP just purely because of the friction it costs in terms of the user experience. So you're not allowed to have any videos. There's JavaScript is not allowed, which makes certain elements can't move. The forms that you need to submit, essentially is difficult.
The styles behind the page and that sort of thing.
Exactly. So the CSS, obviously, to some extent, is just how obviously the styles of the page, like you've said now before, is obviously impacted. And a lot of companies are saying, well, I don't need my site to load 0.8 seconds fast. I'd rather have it load 3 or 4 seconds, but know that I'm actually finding the balance between speed and a good experience, essentially.
So surface the question earlier. What are you asking? Okay, what is your need, and serve that quickly. If you can answer the need effectively enough, people will commit to a page that's a bit heavier, that needs more to load, because they're engaged in that moment. I'm prepared to watch a video for a bit longer, because I'm getting what I need essentially, but give them the option. Don't make the default a heavy page. Do you know what I mean? If the user is diving through that website and every page is super light, okay, but doesn't provide an effective experience, what's really memorable about it? Is somebody going to remember a page loading in half a second, or they're going to remember the emotion that they had in that moment of a page that maybe loaded a little bit slower, but fulfilled my need, fulfilled that sort of experience. You know what I mean? But give them the option to do that. Don't make a video play on default. Don't put videos in the background of your page that are going to take a while to load. Give them the option to watch the video. That sort of stuff. And that's going to improve the performance of your page. Just sort of elements like that. Now, these things are sort of organic. There's constant iterations and learnings. And that speaks to conversion rate optimization that we alluded to earlier, that you're not going to convert on a page that's super slow, but are you going to convert on a page specific to your product that fulfills the user's needs, that creates the empathy, the authenticity, the transparency, and the emotion of that experience that's going to go, I'm done. The reference I used earlier in terms of getting the bike and paying more than what I wanted to, if we use that context of of a user on the page preparing to pay more in terms of time on the page for a positive experience that's going to convince them to convert, they'll more likely engage than not.
Thank you for that. And I think
it's probably a bit deep in terms
no,
of
it was actually, as you can see, I'm listening intently.
Yeah.
From my side, I want to conclude with maybe just asking you a couple of questions. Sure. Well, one question, but it will obviously be a couple of answers.
Sure.
Maybe like 5 or 6 things, 4 or 5 things even, of what people need to consider when it comes to building their site. And I don't want to go over anybody's head here, but just like basic things.
Sure.
What is it, kind of like a mini checklist? Someone can go and print and go and think, okay, cool, I want to build a site and I want to give someone a site to build, because 9 out of 10 people can't build their own site. So they have to go to someone and say, hey, build a site for me. But there's certain things that they need to consider before doing that.
Okay.
So 4 or 5 things that you think people need to take into consideration before they invest money into a site. Okay, before we get to that, one last question. And I'm going to say that this is not the last time I'm saying that. Is it
Your
really...
fifth last question.
My fifth last question. Is it really worth undergoing all the expenses of building a custom site these days for a small to medium-sized business who basically just need a place to host, who they are, what they do, and essentially, because we found this before, where a lot of people, a lot of the medium-sized businesses and bigger businesses would come to us, and then they have a custom-built solution, and it's a basic site, and it's literally a basic site where someone is just capturing leads. It's happened once or twice, and every single time we want to make a change, it's 1,250 Rand an hour. Tracking scripts is 1,250 Rand just to put up. So essentially my question is, like, how can a small to medium sized business find the balance between an affordable site that offers, obviously, or find all the different solutions and offers all the different solutions you needed, and then sometimes going the extra mile to actually build something custom? Is it really necessary to build custom sites these days?
It depends on the need. I think it depends on the business requirements. So broadly, not necessarily. There are platforms and environments out there that do a lot of the heavy lifting. So a big trend in the web development space, it's called a no-code movement. So it's basically a visual interface to building your website. These platforms, one being Webflow, allow designers to be in more.
Actually, no, I don't know Webflow. I've seen
it's powerful. Allow designers to build what it is that they sort of have envisage, and what's been signed off by clients, obviously, as opposed to looking for devs, which is a very, very strong niche and a deep skill set to develop what it is that they need. So, but again, it depends on the requirement. Hey, are you building basically a brochure-based site? Which
that's what most people need these days, right?
Yeah. So, but again, there are third-party marketing platforms that we alluded to earlier from a CRM perspective, Active Campaigns and HubSpots or whatever the case might be, that you can plug in from a CRM perspective. And if you want mobile-type plugins or video-type requirements for your website, you could use that sort of resource. And they're not over-the-top expensive, depending on what your requirements are. But no, broadly, you don't have to go and look for custom devs. If you've got a designer that is digitally savvy, which is very important. So now, we spoke to earlier about how to best structure your page. A designer has to have a digital context as to best structure a page, which leads to a conversion. Now, conversions are broad. It depends on what your goals are. They need to be switched on to that. It's not just a question of put an image and put some copy and put a form down here. You need to know what's going to convert. But that's going to take place when you speak to your client, when the designer interfaces with the brand. What are the requirements? Okay, this is how we see it fulfilling. But this no-code movement is very powerful, and you can go to market a lot quicker. You don't have to spend 6 months deving something that's niche. You can use it. It's almost like a plug and play.
Yeah.
And you roll it out that way. No. So, and like Shopify's from e-commerce perspective, and the WooCommerces of the world and that sort of stuff, they do the heavy lifting. They've got all the AI plugged in, artificial intelligence plugged in the background that does the analyzing for you and does the recommendations. Shopify is so powerful.
Yeah, I love it. We can talk about that.
Awesome, all day.
Like a whole new episode.
And they're almost gamifying website performance and e-commerce performance. And they say, congratulations, you've hit this target for the day.
And it's a benchmark for your industry or whatever.
It's massive. And this allows people who are not specifically that digitally savvy to get on board, especially in the environment now where you can't, you've got to be online, essentially, to amplify your business, where people, if you're a destination-based business, how do you sell? Those sorts of things are very, very powerful, and they feed you strong information and make recommendations. Say, listen, we see your campaign, you've plugged your Facebook stuff into this campaign and it's performing like this. Get your digital guys to maybe amplify this product for this much. And that's how you're going to learn sort of stuff. So to answer your question, there are tools around that don't break the bank, that you can roll out quickly and effectively, and you can iterate, and that are sort of flexible based on what it is that you want to do.
Cool, man. And then lastly, 4 or 5 things that someone needs to keep in mind before running to a designer, or maybe even a coder, or whatever it is, or even before building it themselves. Give us some insight there, please.
Just who are you? What sort of relationship do you want to build with your end user? Firstly. Secondly,
how would you answer that, just out of interest? Give me an example of the water bottle company that we talked about.
What sort of me as a business and how I want to position myself. I'm putting you first. I understand that you're thirsty. I'm not here to sell the bottle of water. I'm here to quench your thirst. And this is the guy behind the bottle of water. So, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation the local greengrocer. They put relationships first. These are the guys that are sort of at the coalface of their business, and that's who I'm going to relate to. Put yourself out there. Put your name and your face to the product and back it. Because if you're sitting behind, deep behind a brand, and especially as a small business, it's difficult to put a face at the front of a massive corporate. But it doesn't mean you can't reference people behind your brand. So put people first, and what problem am I solving of yours? How can I fulfill the need that you've had? That's why you're here, essentially. A lot of the time people don't understand the problem that they have and the need that they have. But if I put you first and I put my face to it, I'm backing myself, sort of thing. And now you start building up empathy and you start building up trust and authenticity and that sort of stuff. Another thing is less friction, the better. Okay, so what is my end result? I want somebody to go to this page where I'm selling this specific bottle of water. Once I'm on that page, what story can I tell around the bottle of water, and how I fulfill that as a brand and as a retailer. Make your website calls to action. So what is a call to action? It's a button to get somebody to perform an action. Okay, make those big and bold and make them stand out from the rest of the content on your page, because that's the funnel that you want somebody to follow. If you think of your website, where do you want the person to go and how quickly do I get them there? The door, which is the button to get them there, has to be front and center. Don't hide the door around the back, 5 passages down. They're not going to get there because they don't know where to go. So you have to make that call to action, that button, stand out prominently. If your brand and your business has a specific color palette, say my color palette is a gray, an orange, and a turquoise, or whatever, make your calls to action that turquoise across every page. Whether it's a big block button or it's a text-based button, that color of that button needs to be the same, because that fulfills a subconscious, it sends a subconscious message as to, if I want something, that's where I need to go. Your headings and stuff can be another color within your color palette that ties in that sort of stuff. So that speaks to friction. Hey, remove the friction, make the important things stand out subconsciously as a user, and this speaks to user experience, and that's going to get them to your end result sort of quicker. And then fulfill the expectations that you've set in your advertising channels. So if you've put an ad out on a Facebook or a post or whatever the case might be, and that fits within a specific mold, visuals, the message, make sure it mirrors the destination, which is your website, and vice versa. So if you put an ad out on social or paid channels and people click on it, so you're paying for this sort of stuff, you're paying for these clicks, and it goes through to a website that doesn't fulfill the expectation, you spent money.
Yeah.
You've lost money.
You're wasting money.
You're wasting money. And you're also wasting money building a really powerful website, everything that fulfills the need, but your channels that are going out there don't connect. You know what I mean? So you've wasted money on your website, sort of thing. So take a step back. It sounds intimidating.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not. You can simplify stuff. It's our jobs as service providers
To do that,
to implement that, to see the vision of the customer, to see the business as a whole, and to see what it is that we're trying to achieve, and to connect those dots.
Cool, man. Look, I want to thank you so much for coming through,
Sure,
and then
thanks.
I want to do a little bit of a plug alert.
Sure.
If anybody had to get a hold of you, where I know they can probably find you on social media, but more from a business perspective.
Yeah, sure.
The website, company name, email, whatever, like
Absolutely.
contact number, Skype name.
Sean.Dunn, that's SEAN.DUNN07 on Skype. LinkedIn, same, Sean.Dunn07. ShanghaiDigital.co.za.
Okay.
Email address is sean@shanghaidigital.co.za.
Cool, man. And I think if there's anybody out there who wants to really take a step back and plan things properly in terms of their marketing for the second half of the year, I think is really important, because that's what you guys do, and you do a really good job. And we've worked together on certain accounts before, and that's one of the reasons why I was very comfortable to invite you on the podcast. So from our side, thanks so much for coming through.
Cool.
Was lovely having you here. Yeah, we'll probably do
No
it
puns.
again. No puns.
What
Not,
happened?
not a single one.
Sort of delved in the conversation.
I know. No, I really, really enjoyed it. And I think
Thank
it's
you.
eye-opening to everybody
well.
out there as well. The next time you come in, we can probably just do a whole episode of Shopify stores.
Yeah.
But anyway, from my side,
Awesome.
thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you.
All the best. And everybody out there, stay safe and have a good one.
Yeah,
Cheers.
easy. Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
Bye.